name is Sarah Omar, and I'm an assistant professor in Arabic and Islamic Studies here at Georgetown University. I'd like to welcome you to our series where you get to meet scholars and hear them discuss their intellectual journeys. My guest today is Dr. Tahera Qutbuddin, professor at the University of Chicago. You can find her full biography on this page. Dr. Qutbuddin, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks also to Georgetown University for organizing this lovely project and for including me.
So I'd like to start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to your areas of research.
My intellectual journey has taken me over many decades to 3 continents, from Mumbai, where my intellectual foundations were laid, to Cairo, where I deep dived into Arabic and the Islamic Turath, and then to the US, where I developed research skills and critical analysis methods, and where I now teach and publish. I'd like to share with you some memories from that journey. I grew up in India, where no one speaks Arabic. My mother tongue is Gujarati. I also spoke Hindi and Urdu in my daily interactions, and I went to English medium convent schools. As a child, I studied the Quran and a smattering of Arabic grammar in after-school madrasa. One very useful exercise I remember was memorizing grammar ditties, like the akhawat inna, anna, ka'anna, layta la'alla, lakinna, and it was sung to a melody. And I use this now in teaching my advanced Arabic syntax class, and I think students enjoy it. Beginning from my childhood and a constant in my life was the training I received from my father, Sayyidina Qutbuddin, who was an esteemed scholar of Islam and who came from many generations of prolific scholars going back more than 500 years. My siblings and I studied with him regularly for many decades, often for several hours a day, poring over manuscripts of history, doctrine, and literature. And among the things he taught us when we were very little, and we would have a lesson with him early every morning before going off to school. So among the things he taught us then were the wisdom sayings of Imam Ali, which have since become a focal point of my research. Also, Indian Muslim communities often chant Arabic qasidas, and I loved the cadences of Arabic, and I was so intrigued by the depths that I glimpsed in these texts. I wanted to engage with them directly. I wanted to learn Arabic really well. So in high school, I excelled in mathematics and English literature. My mom actually had majored in English literature, and I thought about pursuing a career in one of those fields. But the pull of the Arabic manuscripts that I come to love so dearly was stronger. So after completing high school and with a huge leap of courage, I went to Cairo and enrolled in the local Egyptian Ain Shams University. I studied there for 7 years for a BA and then a graduate diploma, and I gained systematic exposure to the Islamic Turath literature. So philology and prosody, prose and poetry, rhetoric and criticism, Islamic history, hadith, Quranic tafsir. Ain Shams is an Arabic medium university, and I knew very little Arabic when I began. So it was a sink or swim experience, especially with the double challenge, of constantly switching between Fusha and Amiya. Initially, especially, I found it extremely daunting. But I made mistakes and I struggled on. And at some point, I had my aha moment. So it had come on gradually, but by the end of my years in Cairo, I realized I developed a pretty nuanced feel for the texts I was reading. And thanks to some wonderful professors and years of immersion, I had a good sense of the Turath library. I felt I had the tools. Well, you can never really master Arabic and the full Turath, but I had an adequate strong box for what I wanted to do. What I needed now was rigorous methodological training. So I applied to Harvard for a PhD. I was lucky to have Wolfert Heinrichs, who, as many of you know, was a walking, talking encyclopedia and a truly humble and kind man. So I had him as an advisor. And at Harvard, the learning curve was equally steep for me. So I learned for the first time to weigh evidence and to write an argument paper. In Cairo, it had been about synthesizing the primary sources with quite minimal critical consideration. At Harvard, I was pretty intimidated initially also by my classmates, but I learned a lot from them too, especially the art of debate and discussion and making a persuasive argument. It's been over 20 years since I completed my PhD. And since 2002, I've been at the University of Chicago. I feel so fortunate to be at this stellar institution. I have access to wonderful resources, a wonderful library of resources for research and publishing, and opportunities to learn from colleagues here and around the globe in conferences and other venues. I really also cherish the opportunity I've had to teach hundreds of bright and hardworking students full of passion and ideas, and from whom also I've learned so much. And I've gotten to supervise or have served on committees for tens of PhD dissertations. I really love what I do. It's been a wonderful journey so far, alhamdulillah, and I look forward to continuing on the path.
Well, thank you so much for that. My next question is about the types of questions you've been asking in your research and in your writing. I know you've had a really long and productive career and very fruitful. And so I'm wondering the type of questions you've been asking and how those questions have changed over time with the different projects that you've been working on.
I've ranged across several different fields within Arabic literature over the years. And what connects them all for me is the beauty of their language and their grounding in themes relating to virtue and character and deep meaning of life issues that are meaningful to me. And the important thing for me in studying classical Arabic literature also is that because it's so interdisciplinary, it allows me to range into the history, the religion, the politics, societies of Islam, and to connect them all through literary texts, beautiful literary texts. A large and lengthy project that I very recently completed is about Arabic oratory, khataba, and Islamic preaching. And my book titled Arabic Oration, Art and Function was published by Brill in 2019. Here it is. I present a comprehensive theory of this prominent genre of Arabic prose in its foundational oral period, that is the 7th and 8th centuries AD. I assess speeches and sermons attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, to Ali, to other political and military leaders, and a number of prominent women. I talk about types of orations and themes, and preservation and provenance, structure and style, and orator-audience authority dynamics. And also with the shift from an oral to a literate culture, I speak of oration's influence on the chancery, epistle, the risala. In the final chapter of the book, I discuss the classical Arabic oration's continuing influence on the contemporary Friday sermon in terms of language and doctrine and politics and ritual. Actually, I got into this topic quite by accident, I must say. After my first book on Muayyad, and I'll say a few words about that book in a minute, I wanted to write a book on Imam Ali's sermons. And I'd been thinking about writing a book on Ali ever since my MA thesis on Ain Shams, which was on Ali's orations. So in trying to get an analytical handle on the vast and complex source material on Ali, I began reading up on oratory, which was the major genre in his oeuvre. And to my surprise, I found almost no diagnostic writing on the early khutbah. At that time, propitiously, I thought, I was asked to participate in a Festschrift volume that was going to focus on Arabic terms. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity to run up a quick piece on the khutbah. And that quick piece turned out to be 100 pages long. And it was still far short of doing justice to the enormous treasure trove I felt I discovered. So this initial research on khataba then morphed into a full 10-year project that was hugely challenging on so many levels, and it culminated in the recently completed book. My front burner project right now is a monograph on Ali's life, teachings, and eloquence that is based on his own sermons, epistles, and sayings, and it builds on my findings in the oration book. The Guggenheim Foundation has awarded me a fellowship to work on the book this year. I'm also completing a translation and edition of the premier collection of Ali's words, which is titled Nahjul Balagha, The Path of Eloquence. And that was the text that I had worked on for my MA thesis at Ain Shams. Earlier, I published 2 other compilations of Ali's words. Let me hold them up for you. Al-Quda'i's Dustur Ma'alim al-Hikam and Al-Jahid's Mi'at Kalima in a volume titled A Treasury of Virtues. And this was initially a bilingual volume, followed by an English-only paperback, and that's why there are two volumes that I've showed you. I also published Qudai's compilation of the Prophet Muhammad's ethical hadith, Kitab al-Shihab, which is titled in English, Light in the Heavens. While working on the oration book, I published several articles on Ali that discuss his profound ideas of just leadership, his teachings on piety and virtue, the persuasive power of rhythm in his sermons, his contemplations on this world and the hereafter, and his fusion of core Quranic teachings with the camel and desert imagery of 7th century Arabia. And I hope to build on all of these for the Ali monograph. I also serve on the editorial board of the Brill series titled Shi'i Islam Texts and Studies, and this was initiated by Zabina Schmidtke and Hassan Ansari. My PhD dissertation was on Mu'ayyad al-Shirazi, who was chief missionary for the Fatimid Ismaili Caliph Imams of Egypt, and it was published, here it is, by Brill as Al-Mu'ayyad al-Shirazi and Fatimid Da'wa Poetry, a case of commitment in classical Arabic literature. I argued that Mu'ayyad flew in the face of the rival Abbasid court's conventional panegyric to create a personal and committed form of Arabic poetry. And that was consonant with his religio-political cause, and it was underpinned by ta'wil, or symbolic interpretation of the Quran. My Ain Shams professor, Tahera Makki, had once asked the class to write a paper on a text that no one had analyzed before. So at that point, I drew on my knowledge of chanted qasidas from my childhood to track down the hidden gem of Mu'ayyad's Diwan. Classical Arabic literature has so much that's unexplored. We are not writing, the 13,000th book on Shakespeare, which is great. I love Shakespeare, but here you're writing about a Shakespeare that no one has analyzed before. And I really encourage any grad students who are listening to this interview and are looking for a dissertation topic to try and dig out more of these hidden gems. I've continued to publish articles on Fatimid and Tayyibi poetry and doctrine, and I have 2 currently in press. One is on principles of Fatimid Ta'wil, and another is on a Marziya on Imam Hussain by the Tayyibi Da'i, Sayyidina Tahir Saifuddin, who was my grandfather. And this aspect of my research also connects with my ongoing interest in Arabic in India.
Wow. So, I mean, you've really taken us through a number of different projects, and I'm wondering, given the length of your career, how have your approaches shifted as you've addressed and taken on new projects, and also as the fields that you're working within are changing over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my scholarship has focused on 2 main areas, analytical writing and literary translation. And my approaches for both have definitely evolved over the years. With regard to translation, my approach, I think, has developed quite radically. Mm-hmm. In my dissertation, I translated several poems by Mu'ayyad, and I now find, they're accurate, thank goodness, but they're somewhat pedantic. Then 10 years ago, Phil Kennedy invited me to join the founding editorial board of the NYU Abu Dhabi series that publishes bilingual editions and lucid English translations of classical texts from the Turath. And my 2 volumes that I showed, Treasure, Virtues, and Light in the Heavens, are also in that series. And the series is titled Library of Arabic Literature. And through many discussions over the years and workshops with my fellow editors, especially I have to thank, Shaukat Turawa, James Montgomery, Devin Stewart were really helpful. I realized that the truest rendering was one that captured many aspects of the meaning of the source texts. It had to include the tone, the register, the literary texture. And I realized it was vitally important to translate line by line and not word by word. It was important to be willing to lose some battles in order to win the war. With regard to methodology, I've realized more and more over the years that, for me at least, it needs to come from within the text. I mean, I begin with the text, I use a zoom in, zoom out method. I read contextual and theoretical materials. I discuss my work with colleagues, and side by side, I deep dive into the text until the text itself suggests what tools would be most useful to apply. With the oration book, what struck me about the khutbah text was their almost, I want to say, inexorable rhythm, which led to a realization about their oral origins. And then orality theory provided a really helpful lens. So then I explored the orator's use of mnemonic devices, devices that aid memorization, like parallelism and vivid imagery. And all of these were harnessed to the function of persuasion. I feel it's also important to allow yourself, to combine theoretical tools, or even to produce new tools, to craft your own theory that you think works best in analyzing the genre you're studying. So, in general, I feel strongly that stepping back, and kind of thinking about my work generally, I feel strongly that the ideas and aesthetics of the past have shaped what we are today. I work mostly on the classical Arabic literary material, but I always like to carry it forward to understand its contemporary relevance, which I've done in both my larger book projects. And in that same line, I've also worked more recently with scholars in the field of virtue ethics. And I publish literary materials from the Islamic heritage of significant ethical value. I'm also a co-director of my late father's educational foundation, the Qutbuddin Jubilee Scholarship Program. And one aspect of its work is what we call the Taqreeb, or Harmony Initiative. And we've partnered with the University of Calcutta, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, to organize academic conferences that highlight exemplars of communal harmony, particularly in India, and also doctrines within its various religious and philosophical traditions that actually promote understanding and mutual respect. And overall, it's really important for me in all the different aspects of my research to try to use my academic work to make a difference in the communities that I engage with, and to make some small contribution to people's lives.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your intellectual journey with us, and really for being here and sharing all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of you who watched this interview.